This is Diana Sullivan in Austin, Texas. I have a new book of 11 round dishcloth patterns. They are all made with a graft. They are not cast on and then sewed together. They have an invisible seam. There really is one here somewhere, and it's hard to find the invisible seam. If you are interested in purchasing the group of 11 patterns, the information about that is in the links to this video as well as the description for this video. Please keep in mind that there are 3 videos that are free on YouTube to help you succeed in making these round dishcloths. One of them just goes over the everyday techniques in them. They have the knit stitch, the purl stitch, increase, decrease, yarn over, and turning in the middle of the row. Most of you already know those techniques. There is a video on the Provisional Cast-Ons, my 2 favorite ones, showing in detail how to do those. You need a Provisional Cast-On so that you can do an invisible graft. And then, of course, there is a video on how to do the invisible graft. I think these 3 videos give you techniques that are really useful for these, but they're also ways for you to tune up your general hand knitting skills. I have a way to put these together that is so perfect you can't see it on the top or see it on the bottom, and they look great. It is a graft, and there are a lot of ways to graft, but for you to do a graft, you have to start with some sort of provisional cast-on. A provisional cast-on is a cast-on that you plan to remove later. When you remove it, you're going to have open loops. A very simple provisional cast-on is to simply cast on any old way and knit a few rows with a contrasting color. So right now I have some purple yarn, and I'm just going to knit a few rows with it. I need to knit at least 1 row, but 2 or 3 rows is often better. It gives you just a little something to hold on to later when you're picking up stitches or you're figuring out how to graft the piece. Now, provisional cast-ons are useful because once they're removed, you do not have a lump from a cast-on. So there I just did an ordinary cast-on and I knitted a row, almost finished. 1 more stitch. And then I'm going to knit a 2nd row. I'm teaching 2 methods right now. The other video shows the chain stitch method, and it's quick and easy too. Now, once I have my couple of rows of knitting on an ordinary cast-on in a contrasting color, I will cut the yarn. Here is some pink yarn, and all I'm going to do is knit a few rows with the pink yarn so that I can show you how this temporary cast-on works. I'll be back when I've knitted a few rows. For my example, I would be doing a garter stitch project, and the pink would be the actual project, and the purple would be the provisional cast-on. Now, there are a lot of things that you could do after you've done a provisional cast-on. One would be to take a needle and sew each of these loops to another set of loops, or graft them, or sew them to a side seam, whatever you wanted to do, and you would be avoiding a ridge from the cast-on. Another thing that you very often might do is you might pick up these loops and then do something with them, maybe knit them. So an easy way to pick them up is to just hold this provisional cast on so that you can see each of these loops and just poke the needle in them, front to back, which puts the stitches on the needle so that the front of the stitch, that is the part in front of the needle between the needle and my face, this part, is before the back of the stitch. See, it is slanting leftward, and that's the same way that stitches are typically on the knitting needle. So I get all those picked up, and then I want to just quickly show you how to remove that provisional cast on. Over here on this edge, cut the yarn very close. The purple yarn, you don't want to get a bite of the pink yarn. This is the yarn to throw away. So I'm slipping the point of my scissors into that loop of purple yarn. Then on this end, I'm grabbing this purple string, and that's the end that I cut. And I pull, and the purple comes away, leaving the pink stitches on the needle. So that is one way to use a provisional cast on, and it's a very easy provisional cast on. I do these provisional cast ons a lot with my circular dishcloths. I also do the chain provisional cast on. I like those two better than the other ones I have tried. But if I was making a stockinette stitch sample, I would do a stockinette stitch provisional cast on, where I would knit a row and then purl the next row and then knit a row and purl the next row. Now I'm going to show you one of the easiest provisional cast-ons ever if you can just crochet a little bit. So I have a white dishcloth I'm going to knit, and I have a piece of medium blue yarn. So there's a really good strong contrast between the white and that medium blue. The medium blue yarn is going to be a provisional cast-on that is removed later. I'll start by putting a slip knot on my crochet hook, and then I'm going to do a very loose chain. I'm taking my time and pulling each chain stitch loose. I have to chain at least as many times as the stitches I want to cast on. So I tend to count, and I usually do a couple extra chains because I would rather make a mistake where I've got an extra chain or two which doesn't do any harm than make the mistake of casting on and discovering I don't have enough chains. And then I just cut the yarn and I pull it on through. Now what I have is a loose chain, and if I put it on my table here and pull it down and give you a really close look, you will see the individual chain stitches. So do you see the individual chain stitches? They are shaped like V's. Let me point that out. Here is a V, here is a V, here is a V, shaped like V's. But we're going to use the back of the chain. So if I turn it over, instead of looking like V's, they look like little circles with a ridge in the middle, a little stitch in the middle of each one. Well, that ridge in the middle, here, 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 or let me even poke my needle in so you can see it. There, and then there, and then there. Those ridges are where I'm going to pick up stitches. And if I do it correctly, this will be almost effortless to remove later when I want it gone. So here's what I'm going to do. I take my knitting needle and I take my chain and I look at the side and find the ridge and just poke the knitting needle right under that ridge stitch. So we'll get that one, and then we'll just get this one. See it? And then this thing right here, that's my next ridge. So I go in and I get it only. Now I can look on the back and I'll be able to tell that I picked up the right thing because all I can see on the back of the needle is the chains. I put the ridges on this side. The chains, I mean the V's. So I just put all these little ridges on here, however many I want to cast on. Well, now that was easy, and I have a cast on. It looks a lot like a typical cast on. I have 3, 6, 10, I have 13 stitches cast on here for my provisional cast on. Now I set my blue yarn aside and I get my yarn that I'm going to actually knit with. This would be my dishcloth yarn. And I'm going to take my second knitting needle and knit as usual. So I hold this like any other cast on. I put my other needle in it, I wrap the yarn around it, and I knit it off the top. And once I get the first stitch in, I can put the yarn around my hand like I usually do when I'm knitting, and just knit those stitches off one by one. Now keep in mind that this is the first row of the knitting, so if you're doing dishcloths and you want the odd number of rows so that you can get the invisible graft, this counted as a row. In my book that's pretty easy to do because you do this and then the sections in my dishcloth are even numbers, so that gives you your exact odd number that you need for that graft. And I'm knitting, it's just as easy as knitting any first row after a cast off. Oops, I want to get all of them, so let's get that one too. There I go. So now I have my first row of knitting on. Just adjust that tension a little, and that's how it looks. And I'll just switch hands. I'm going to knit a few more rows of knitting and then show you how to remove it. Here's how things look after I've knitted a while. And let's say that I had knitted the whole project and what I wanted to do was sew the white loops to another piece, which is what I do on the dishcloths. Well, in that case, if I turn this over, I can easily see the loops for sewing. They are these individual white loops along the bottom, and I could sew those up. The other thing that I might want to do is pick up stitches along here, and to do that I just take a knitting needle and poke it in each of the white loops on across, and in that way I can pick up stitches and knit a ribbing or knit whatever it is that I need to knit. Now when it's time to take the provisional cast on off, whether you knitted some stitches with it or you sewed it to something, you will be amazed at how easy that is to do. Look at this little edge with the chains. You want to look at the V's. These are V's right here, little column of V's, and the pointed end won't unravel, but the rounded end, the place where the V is wider, the top of the V, so to speak, those will come apart. And you can either cut this or you can pick the yarn out. I'm just going to pick the yarn out. So I picked it out of there, and then I can pull the string and check it out. It will unravel. And what it leaves are open loops. Now, these loops you wouldn't unravel until you had these loops secured. These loops will unravel on you. So you would definitely wait until you had done something with them, like pick them up or knit with them or sew them down, because you see, they will unravel. But that is a super easy provisional cast-on that you can use for these dishcloths and for many other situations in knitting.